After studying this module, you shall be able to define the term leadership, describe the various approaches to leadership, know the nature of leadership, analyze the differences between the various approaches to leadership, and identify the shortcomings of various approaches. Leadership is one of the most important topics studied under the field of organizational behavior. This is due to the fact that a leader is central to the growth and development of any organization. Not only this, the leaders also play a crucial role in shaping the organization in a particular way which draws upon their leadership style and qualities. The competencies and skills of a leader are deeply studied and researched upon in literature. In order to allow us to understand the concept of leadership, a number of theories have been proposed by various researchers. Theories are nothing but conceptual frameworks propounded to delineate the various aspects of a concept. Leadership too has been seen and studied from many different perspectives. These are different approaches to leadership which are discussed in this module. The most important approaches to leadership are the trait theories, the second is the behavioral theories, and the third is the contingency theories. Under behavioral theories, we have the Ohio State Studies, University of Michigan Studies, Managerial Grid, and Scandinavian Studies. Under contingency theories, we have the Fiedler Model, Cognitive Resource Theory, Hersey and Blanchard Situational Theory, and Path Goal Theory. First, we will start with the discussion of trait theories. Now, trait theories basically focus upon the personal qualities and characteristics of individuals which differentiate between leaders and non-leaders. Trait theories are called so because they are primarily concerned with identifying those traits which have been historically seen in leaders. The basic premise of these theories is that leaders are born and not made. This means effective leaders can be chosen from among available individuals to assume leadership responsibilities if their traits are identified. They possess certain qualities which set them apart from the followers as well as ineffective leaders. The leaders have been described through terms such as courageous, enthusiastic, charismatic, etc. However, the major shortcoming of these theories was that a set of traits universally applicable to all leaders was not identified, although those traits were identified which were regularly associated with successful and effective leaders. These included qualities like ambition, energy, a desire to lead, honesty and integrity, self-confidence, intelligence, and job-relevant knowledge. Another limitation of these theories was that they failed to identify those traits which would predict leadership in all kinds of situations. Now we will talk about the behavioral theories of leadership. In contrast to the trait theories, the behavioral theories propose that specific behaviors differentiate leaders and non-leaders, whereas the trait theories propose that the leaders can be selected based on the traits. The behavioral theories propose that the leaders have to be trained in the behaviors which form effective leaders. In other words, The behavioral theories contend that there are specific behaviors which help in identifying leaders. Some of the most popular behavioral theories are: first is the Ohio State studies. The behavioral theories research at Ohio State University was initiated in the late 1940s. The researchers intended to identify different dimensions of leader behavior as described by employees. They started with over 1,000 dimensions but ultimately narrowed them down to two, which were initiating structure and consideration. Talking about the first dimension, that is initiating structure, it dealt with the leader's behavior intended at structuring work as well as interpersonal relationships at work. It describes the tendency of the leader to place higher importance upon well-structured roles, work relationships and goals in comparison with personalized interaction. Attainment of goals is deemed more important by the leader than interpersonal relationships. Now coming to the second dimension, which is known as consideration. This dimension characterizes the leader's concern for mutual trust, respect, and regard for subordinates' feelings. A leader high on consideration in comparison with initiating structure is more likely to be friendly, more personal in his or her interactions with co-workers and subordinates, and to be more supportive in general. Subsequent research on these lines has revealed that those leaders who score high on both initiating structure as well as consideration dimensions, also called as high leaders, were more effective as compared to those who were rated low on either or both of these dimensions. Thus, Ohio State studies were the first to point out the importance of both task and human dimensions in assessing leadership, although these studies fail to include situational factors as important in the study of leadership. The second is University of Michigan studies. At just about the same time as the Ohio State studies, leadership studies were carried out at the University of Michigan to identify leader behaviors which were seemingly related to performance effectiveness. These studies were known as the Michigan studies. Just like the Ohio State studies, the Michigan studies also came out with two dimensions of leader behavior. They were employee-oriented. In employee-oriented dimension, the focus was on leaders who were concerned with interpersonal relations with the subordinates, their needs and well-being. They brought a component of compassion in work. The second is production-oriented. Another dimension identified was production-oriented. Production-oriented leaders, as the term itself suggests, were those whose primary concern revolved around attainment of goals and getting the job done by the subordinates. They focus upon the work component rather than the interpersonal component when it came to their approach towards co-workers and subordinates. The researchers at Michigan found that the employee-oriented leaders were more successful in achieving higher group productivity and job satisfaction as compared with the production-oriented leaders. The third is the Managerial Grid. Managerial Grid was proposed by R. Blake and J.S. Moten in 1964 as a two-dimensional 9x9 matrix of leadership style. It has also been referred to as the leadership grid. Blake and Moten represented leader behavior along two dimensions of concern for people and concern for production. Scores on each axis ranged from 1, which is low, to 9, which is high. Since it is a 9 by 9 matrix, it created 81 different cells, each representing a different leadership style. It results in following leadership styles. First is impoverished style. It is represented by 1-1 cell. These type of leaders have low concern for both people and production. Second is the country club style. It is represented by 1-9 cell. Here the concern for people is the highest, but concern for production is very low. Third is produce or perish style. It is represented by 9-1 cell. It is also called dictatorial style. With a high concern for production, this type of leaders have a very low concern for people and hence end up being too rigid for achieving targets. The fourth is middle of the road style. It is represented by 5-5 cell. Leaders with this style have a balanced approach towards both concern for people and concern for production. And the fifth is team style. It is represented by 9-9 cell. Here, the concern for people and the concern for production are both high. Now coming to the Scandinavian studies, the above mentioned studies were carried out between late 1940s and early 1960s. These studies, initiated by researchers in Finland and Sweden, have been trying to reinterpret the dimensions delineated by the Ohio and the Michigan studies in the context of the present organizational scenario. These studies have reassessed whether there are only two dimensions which capture leader behavior. Alternatively, they have proposed a new dimension which focused on development-oriented behavior of the leaders relevant in today's world. These leaders have an innovative approach and strive to generate new and creative ideas. They value experimentation and initiate change when required. The Scandinavian studies propose that in today's dynamic world, the leaders have to be development-oriented in order to be effective. There has been much support for the development-oriented leader behavior as a separate dimension. Now let's talk about the assessment of behavioral theories. Behavioral studies were a different class of studies which studied leadership for more than just traits. These studies included a crucial aspect of the leadership study, that is, the behavioral component. This was a new development, but still, these studies were not completely free from limitations and shortcomings. The major reason for this has been the fact that the behavioral studies have not found strong and consistent relationship between leader behavior and the performance of the group. A serious flaw of the trait theories, that is, the absence of consideration of the situational factors, has been repeated in these studies. Now let's talk about the contingency theories of leadership. Both the trait and the behavioral studies failed to capture the influence of situational factors on the leadership effectiveness. This shortcoming was addressed by the contingency theories, which recognized for the first time that assessing leadership effectiveness required more than identifying leader traits or behaviors. These theories focused upon the situational factors and their influence. In other words, these theories suggested that the leader's effectiveness was dependent on how he or she responds and acts in different kinds of situations. Some leaders are more effective in high pressure situations, while others are made for more relaxed and stress-free situations. Some of the leaders are capable of modifying their leadership style according to the changing demands of the situations. Thus, these theories also addressed the leader's quality of being flexible. 5 of the most successful and well-accepted contingency theories will be discussed now. The first contingency theory that I will be discussing with you is the Fiedler's model. This contingency model for leadership was developed by Fred Fiedler in 1967. The Fiedler contingency model addressed the need to match leaders' style of interaction to the degree of control and influence given to the leader by the situation. According to Fiedler, the leadership style of an individual is fixed, and he developed the least preferred co-worker questionnaire to identify whether a leader is task-oriented or relationship-oriented. Fiedler stated that it is required to identify the leadership style of the leader as well as to assess the situation to understand whether or not it suits that style. If a situation demands a task-oriented leader, then in order to carry out leader functions effectively, either a task-oriented leader has to be selected or the situation has to be modified to suit the style of a relationship-oriented leader. Fiedler presented 3 contingency dimensions in order to assess how much control a leader has in a situation. These are, first, leader-member relations. These can be either good or bad. The second is the task structure. The task structure can either be high or low. And the third is position power. It can be either strong or weak. A leader has maximum control in a situation when the leader-member relations are good, task structure is high, and the positional power is strong. These dimensions define a situation which is then matched with the leadership style to assess the leadership effectiveness. Fiedler concluded that when the situations are either too favorable, that is high control situation, or too unfavorable, that is low control situation, task-oriented leaders generally performed better. On the contrary, the relationship-oriented leaders performed well in moderately favorable or moderately unfavorable situations, which offer moderate control to the leader. Despite being a powerful model, Fiedler's contingency model was criticized on the grounds that the LPC scores were unstable and the 3 contingency dimensions were difficult to assess. Now let's talk about the second theory, that is the cognitive resource theory. The contingency model proposed by Fiedler was further extended by him along with Joe Garcia in 1987. This was called the cognitive resource theory. This theory focused on the role of stress in situational unfavorableness as well as addressed the influence of leaders' intelligence and experience on his or her reaction to stress on job. It is difficult for the leaders to think rationally when under stress. Fiedler and Garcia found that a leader's intellectual abilities correlate positively with performance under low stress but negatively under high stress. On the other hand, the experience of a leader showed negative correlation with performance under low stress but a positive correlation under high stress. In other words, the cognitive resource theory suggested that intelligent leaders were found to be more effective in low stress situations, while highly experienced leaders were found to be more effective in high stress situations. Cognitive resource theory has received strong research support in its favor. Coming to the third theory, that is Hersey and Blanchard's situational leadership theory. This theory was developed by Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard in 1969. Keeping in line with the very basic of leadership, that it is the followers who accept or reject a leader, situational leadership theory has focused upon the role of followers in leadership effectiveness. Hersey and Blanchard have argued that the right leadership style is contingent or dependent on the level of followers' readiness. They argue that the leader should match his or her style with the ability and willingness of the subordinates. This theory is also called as the life cycle theory of leadership because the needs of maturity of subordinates move in stages in the form of a cycle. Willingness refers to the psychological maturity of the subordinates, which can vary from person to person. Based on this premise, 4 situations may arise, and situational leadership theory has identified 4 different leaders' behaviors for each of them. The first is the telling style, where there is low ability and low willingness of the followers. The second is the selling style, where there is low ability and high willingness of followers. The third is delegating style of leadership, where there is high ability and high willingness of the followers. And the fourth is participating style of leadership, where there is high ability and low willingness of the followers. Coming to telling style, it focuses on directive leadership style. This is appropriate for the situations where subordinates have low maturity level, that is, they are neither willing nor able to perform. The second is the selling style. Here the leader behavior is both supportive and directive. It is appropriate for the subordinates who are willing to perform but are unable to do so. The third is the participating style of leadership. In this leadership style, the leader is more supportive than directive. It is suitable when the subordinates are able but unwilling to perform. The fourth is the delegating style. This style is low on both supportive and directive behavior. When subordinates are both willing and able to perform, they hardly require any leadership support. Now coming to the next theory, which is the path-goal theory of leadership. This theory was proposed by Robert House in 1971. According to this theory, the leader should assume the responsibility to guide his or her subordinates on the path to their goals. In other words, the leader should provide the subordinates with all the necessary information, support, and other resources which are required by the followers to achieve their goals. Therefore, the 2 major roles of the leader are to create a goal orientation and to improve the path towards the goal so as to facilitate attainment of goals. The path-goal theory outlines 2 types of situational or contingency variables. First is the environmental contingency factors. These are those factors which are associated with the characteristics of work environment and are beyond the control of employees. These primarily include task structure, formal authority, system and work group. The second is the personal characteristics of employees. These factors are associated with the employees themselves and partially determine how they respond to leaders' behavior. These include locus of control, experience and perceived ability. This theory identifies 4 leadership behaviors in order to highlight which leadership behaviors should be assumed by the leader in response to changing situations so as to maximize effectiveness. They are as follows. First is directive. This leadership behavior is aimed at giving specific guidance and clarifying performance expectations. It is more successful in situations where the tasks are ambiguous or stressful. The second is the supportive leaders. Supportive leaders are primarily friendly. They show concern for subordinates as people and for the needs of followers. This leadership style produces effective results when the tasks are well structured. The third is the participative leader. Participative leader behavior includes consultation with followers and uses their suggestions for making decisions. This style is more successful when the followers have an internal locus of control. And the fourth is the achievement oriented. This kind of leader behavior emphasizes excellence in subordinates. These leaders set challenging goals. This theory suggests that leaders are flexible and that the same leaders can display any or all leadership styles. Now, talking about the assessment of contingency theories, the contingency theories addressed a major lacuna which was left behind by the trait and the behavioral theories, that of the influence of situational factors on leadership effectiveness. But these theories too have certain shortcomings which should be taken care of. For example, contingency theories overemphasize the importance of situational factors without giving due consideration to the followers. Also, these theories have not addressed the issue of differential treatment meted out to different followers by the same leaders. In other words, it is assumed that the leaders treat all their followers equally, which is not always true in practical situations. Summary: different theories have been propounded by different researchers in order to understand the concept of leadership. They can primarily be classified as trait theories, behavioral theories, and contingency theories. Trait theories focus upon the personal traits and qualities of individuals which deem them fit or unfit to be leaders. Behavioral theories identify types of leader behaviors in order to assess leadership effectiveness. Major behavioral theories are Ohio State Studies, Michigan Studies, Managerial Grid, and Scandinavian Studies. Contingency theories focused upon the influence of situational factors on leadership effectiveness. Major contingency theories are the Fiedler's Contingency Model, Cognitive Resource Theory, Hersey and Blanchard's Situational Leadership Theory, and House's Path Goal Theory.